A master rewarded his strongest slave with his beautiful daughter, and what happened next shocked absolutely everyone. This wasn't just any arranged union, it was unprecedented. A slave marrying into one of the wealthiest families in the region? Unheard of. But what appeared to be an act of extraordinary generosity concealed motives darker than anyone could imagine, and what followed would change everything forever. The sun beat down mercilessly on Elias's back as he hauled another massive stone across Lord Caldwell's expanding estate. 20 years of brutal labor had sculpted his body into a weapon, muscles rippling beneath scars that told stories of survival against impossible odds. The other slaves gave him a wide berth, both out of respect and fear. All slaves and servants to the main courtyard, now. The overseer's voice cracked like a whip across the grounds. Something was wrong. Lord Caldwell never addressed the slaves directly. Whispers spread like wildfire as hundreds gathered, eyes downcast but minds racing. The Lord's financial troubles had been mounting. Was this a mass selling? Executions? Lord Caldwell emerged onto his balcony, his daughter Sophia trailing behind him like a ghost. Her face, usually composed into perfect nobility, was ashen. "For 20 years," Lord Caldwell's voice boomed across the silent crowd, "one slave has outworked, outfought, and outlasted all others." His cold eyes found Elias. "Today, I reward such exceptional service. Elias will marry my daughter Sophia in 7 days' time." The courtyard erupted in gasps. Elias's head snapped up, breaking every rule of slave conduct, his eyes meeting Sophia's for the first time. The look that passed between them wasn't relief or joy. It was pure, undiluted terror. But what no one realized was that Lord Caldwell wasn't smiling out of generosity. The cruel twist at the corner of his mouth suggested something far more sinister was at play. A game where both bride and groom were merely pawns in a desperate scheme that would soon unravel in ways no one could have predicted. "You've lost your mind, Father," Sophia's voice echoed through Lord Caldwell's study as she slammed her palms on his mahogany desk. "I will not marry a slave." Lord Caldwell didn't even look up from his ledgers. "You'll do exactly as I command." "Why him? Why now?" Her voice cracked with desperation. Finally, he raised his eyes, cold and calculating. "Governor Harrington arrives next week. His bastard son disappeared 20 years ago. A son with a distinctive birthmark on his shoulder, exactly like the one our Elias bears." Sophia stepped back, the pieces falling into place. "You're blackmailing the governor with his own son." "Blackmail is such an ugly word," Lord Caldwell smiled thinly. "I prefer leverage. Our family is bankrupt, Sophia. This marriage creates a blood tie to the governor. He'll have no choice but to save us from ruin. And if I refuse, then I'll simply reveal Elias's identity and sell him to the governor's enemies." He shrugged. "Either way, I profit, but your future would be significantly less comfortable." Across the estate in the slave quarters, Elias was having his own reckoning. "It's a death sentence," whispered Marcus, the oldest slave. "No slave marries nobility and lives. He's planning to kill you after the ceremony." Elias stared at his calloused hands. "Or during it. A public execution disguised as a wedding. But why? After all these years?" "Perhaps you've become too valuable," Marcus suggested. "The others look to you now, not the overseers. Perhaps he fears rebellion." Elias nodded slowly. "Then I'll run tonight. The dogs will track you. The bounty hunters will find you. Better to die free than—" The door creaked open. Both men froze as a hooded figure slipped inside. Sophia pulled back her hood, her eyes meeting Elias's with fierce determination. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "I think we're both being sacrificed for my father's ambitions, and I believe I know why he chose you specifically." What neither realized as they began their wary conversation was that they were both pawns in a game far more dangerous than marriage. A game where the true stakes involved power, bloodlines, and secrets that could reshape the entire province. "You have his eyes," Sophia whispered, studying Elias's face in the dim light of the slave quarters. "Governor Harrington's eyes. I've seen his portrait in Father's study countless times. The same piercing intensity, the same shade of amber, like polished bronze in sunlight." Elias tensed, his calloused hands gripping the rough-hewn bench beneath him. "What exactly are you saying?" "You're his son, his legitimate son, not a bastard as my father claims. The heir who vanished during the border raids 20 years ago." She pulled a crumpled document from her cloak, the yellowed parchment marked with an official seal. "This is a birth record I found hidden in my father's private lockbox. See the name? Elias James Harrington. My father has been planning this for decades, waiting for the perfect moment to exploit your existence." Elias stared at the document, his fingers hovering above it as if touching it might burn him. The name, written there, stirred something deep within his consciousness. A name he'd heard in dreams, but dismissed as fantasy. His world tilted on its axis as fragments of long-buried memories surfaced like debris after a storm. A grand house with marble columns, a woman's gentle voice singing lullabies, the smell of leather-bound books and beeswax candles, a man in uniform lifting him high into the air with laughter. "If that's true," he said, his voice barely audible, "why keep me as a slave all these years? Why not ransom me back immediately? Why wait 2 decades of brutal labor when he could have profited sooner? Because 20 years ago, your father was merely a military captain with modest means and limited influence," Sophia explained, her voice hardening like cooling steel. "Now he's governor of the entire eastern province, with a fortune that could save our crumbling estate 10 times over and political connections that could restore my father's standing among the nobility." Her eyes flashed with disgust. "My father is a patient man when it comes to profit. He's been cultivating you like a rare crop, waiting for the perfect harvest. And I'm to be sacrificed at the moment of ripening," Elias concluded bitterly. "As am I," Sophia added. "Once he has the governor's money and protection, neither of us will be necessary. In fact, we'll be dangerous loose ends." A sudden noise outside startled them both. The crunch of boots on gravel, the jingle of keys. Marcus, who had been keeping watch, peered through a crack in the wall, his weathered face tightening with alarm. "Overseers," he hissed, his voice urgent but controlled. 6 of them with dogs. They're conducting a surprise inspection of the quarters. This isn't routine. Something's wrong." Sophia quickly tucked the document into a hidden pocket sewn into her cloak. "They must suspect something. My father has eyes everywhere." She pulled her hood lower over her face. "Is there another way out?" Marcus nodded toward a loose board in the back wall. "Through there, behind the water barrels. It leads to the drainage ditch. You'll be covered in filth, but it's better than being discovered." "Meet me tomorrow night at the old well by the eastern orchard," Sophia whispered to Elias as she moved toward the escape route. "After the midnight bell, when the guard rotation changes. We need a proper plan. Both our lives depend on it." As she slipped away into the darkness, Elias turned to Marcus, the closest thing to a father he'd known for 20 years. "I need to know if what she says is true. All of it." The old slave nodded slowly, deep lines etching his forehead as he considered. "There's someone who might know more than I do. Old Helena in the kitchen. She's been here longer than anyone, even longer than Lord Caldwell himself. She served his father and remembers the border wars. Can you arrange it without drawing attention? I'll find a way to get you assigned to kitchen duty tomorrow. The head cook owes me a favor." Marcus placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, a gesture that would have earned them both lashes if seen by an overseer. "Be careful, boy. If what the lady says is true, you're suddenly worth more than this entire estate. That makes you both valuable and dangerous." The overseer's inspection proved unusually thorough that night. They upturned sleeping pallets, checked beneath floorboards, and questioned several slaves about unusual activities. Elias lay perfectly still on his thin mat, controlling his breathing as an overseer's lantern swept over him, wondering if the man could somehow hear the thundering of his heart or sense the revelation that had just upended his entire existence. The next day, as Elias hauled massive stones under the merciless summer sun, his mind raced faster than his laboring heart. The overseer's whip cracked nearby, but for once the familiar sound barely registered. If he was truly the governor's son, escape wasn't just possible. It was necessary. Not just for him, but for Sophia, too. Lord Caldwell would dispose of both of them once he secured the governor's money and influence. "You're distracted today," whispered Thomas, another slave working alongside him. "That's dangerous." "Sorry," Elias muttered, adjusting his grip on the stone. "Just thinking." "About your upcoming wedding to the master's daughter." Thomas gave a bitter laugh. "The entire estate talks of nothing else. Some think you've made a deal with the devil for such fortune." "It's no fortune," Elias replied quietly. "It's a trap." Before Thomas could respond, the midday bell rang, signaling the brief meal break. As arranged, Marcus intercepted Elias on the way to the slave dining area. "Kitchen needs extra hands," he said loudly enough for the overseer to hear. "Something about preparations for the wedding feast. This one's strong enough to move the heavy pots." The overseer waved them off with disinterest, and soon Elias found himself in the sweltering kitchen, where dozens of servants bustled about preparing the midday meal for the household. In a far corner, bent over a massive pot of stewing vegetables, stood Helena, her back curved like a bow from decades of kitchen work, her once dark hair now completely white, her hands gnarled like ancient tree roots. Marcus guided Elias toward her, speaking in hushed tones. "Helena, this boy needs your wisdom about the past, about when he first came to the estate." The old woman looked up, her rheumy eyes narrowing as she studied Elias's face. Without a word, she gestured for them to follow her into the root cellar, one of the few places in the busy kitchen where conversation might go unheard. In the cool dimness, surrounded by hanging herbs and sacks of potatoes, Helena's gnarled hands trembled as she spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "I was there when Lord Caldwell returned from the border campaign with a child," she confirmed, her voice a dry whisper like autumn leaves. "It was during the 3rd year of the border wars. He came back early before the fighting had ended, claiming illness. But he was not ill. He was triumphant. He boasted to his brother that night after too much wine that he'd found his fortune in the ruins of a noble estate near the border. Said he'd raise you as a slave until the time was right." "You heard this yourself?" Elias pressed, his heart pounding. "With these very ears." Helena tapped her wrinkled earlobe. "I was serving them brandy in the study. They thought me too old and insignificant to remember or repeat what I heard. Lord Caldwell said he'd attack the Harrington summer estate himself, leading a small band of mercenaries disguised as enemy soldiers." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. "He was responsible for the raid." Helena nodded grimly. "He killed the guards and servants, took the child, you, and set fire to the evidence. The lady of the house, your mother, had already fled with an earlier evacuation. The master, your father, was away fighting. By all accounts, the child of the house perished in the attack." Her eyes, suddenly sharp despite their cloudiness, fixed on Elias. "Except you didn't. And the birthmark, Sophia mentioned a birthmark. The mark of the Harrington line. Every male child bears it, a crescent moon shape on the right shoulder blade." Helena's eyes clouded with memory. "When you first arrived, Lord Caldwell ordered me to bathe you. I saw it then, though I didn't understand its significance until later, when rumors of the lost Harrington heir spread through the province." Elias unconsciously reached over his shoulder, touching the birthmark he'd never been able to see but had always known was there, a slightly raised crescent of lighter skin. "The governor has searched for his son for 20 years, Helena continued. "There were rumors the child survived, but no proof. Lord Caldwell was careful. He changed your name, kept you working in the quarries and fields where nobility would never look closely at a laborer's face. And, as you grew, he watched you carefully, testing your strength and intelligence, preparing his investment for the perfect moment of return. Return as a slave to be bargained with, not as a son," Elias said bitterly. "Precisely." Helena nodded. "And now, the governor is at the height of his power and wealth, with no other heirs since his wife died in childbirth years after your disappearance. The time is perfect for Lord Caldwell's scheme." A call from above interrupted them. Someone was looking for Helena. The old woman quickly pressed something into Elias's palm. "Take this. I've kept it hidden all these years, not knowing why, except that it seemed wrong to discard it." Elias opened his hand to find a small silver pendant, tarnished with age, a crescent moon encircling a star, the Harrington family emblem. Something inside him recognized it instantly, as if his body remembered what his mind had forgotten. "It was around your neck when you arrived," Helena whispered before shuffling back toward the stairs. "They thought they'd taken everything from you, but I saved this one piece." That night, with the pendant hidden in the hem of his rough shirt, Elias met Sophia at the old well. The moon hung low and full, casting long shadows across the overgrown orchard. Their plan took shape in whispered exchanges. They would escape during the wedding ceremony 3 days hence, when security would be focused on appearances rather than containment. The governor himself would be present, invited by Lord Caldwell to witness the generous elevation of a slave through marriage to his daughter. "We'll need a distraction," Sophia insisted, her practical mind working through the details. "Something significant enough to draw all eyes away from us, even if only for a few moments." "The slave quarters," Elias suggested, "if they were to catch fire." "No," Sophia interrupted firmly. "No one innocent dies for our escape." Elias nodded, ashamed he'd even suggested it. "You're right, but we need something." "The wedding gifts," Sophia said suddenly. "They'll be displayed in the great hall, valuable items from all the noble families. If they were to disappear just as the ceremony begins, the guards would be thrown into chaos." Elias finished, seeing the merit in her plan. "But how? We'll both be at the center of attention." "We need help," Sophia admitted. "Someone who can move freely during the ceremony." "Marcus," Elias said without hesitation, "and perhaps a few others I trust, but I won't endanger them without their full consent." "Once we escape, we'll head directly to the governor's summer residence," Sophia continued. "It's only half a day's ride if we take horses from the stable. My father expects the governor to stay there before and after the wedding. And if we reach him first, we control the narrative," Elias concluded. "But he might not believe us. I have the pendant, but is it enough proof?" "The birthmark will be proof enough," Sophia assured him. "And this." She produced another document from her cloak. "Your original birth certificate, with your footprint in ink. The governor will recognize it. It's his own copy that my father stole during the raid." As they finalized details, neither noticed the faint rustle of leaves from the large oak tree overlooking the well. Neither saw the small figure perched among its branches. Lily, one of the house servants who had followed Sophia out of curiosity and now listened with wide eyes to every word. What they didn't realize, as they plotted their escape, was that Lord Caldwell's schemes ran deeper and darker than either imagined. As they whispered by the well, he was meeting with a hooded figure at the edge of the estate, near the crumbling stone wall that marked the property line. "The slave knows too much," Lord Caldwell muttered, passing a heavy purse to the stranger. "I've seen him watching me, questioning, and my daughter has always been too clever for her own good. I've noticed items missing from my study, documents that should have remained hidden." The assassin nodded, weighing the purse with practiced hands before securing it inside his cloak. "The wedding will proceed as planned. The poison will be slow-acting but inevitable. Neither will survive the celebration. By midnight you'll be a grieving father and master, and the governor will have no choice but to compensate you generously for your tragic loss." "Make it look natural," Lord Caldwell instructed coldly. "The governor must suspect nothing." "Of course. That's why you hired the best." The assassin bowed slightly. "By this time next week, your financial troubles will be over, and your two problems will be buried side by side in the family plot, a tragic love story for the province to mourn." But in the shadows behind them, concealed in a drainage ditch that ran along the wall, a third figure listened intently. Marcus had followed his master, suspecting treachery when he'd seen Lord Caldwell leave the house alone after midnight. Now he lay perfectly still in the filthy water, barely breathing, as the two men finalized their murderous arrangement. As they departed in opposite directions, Marcus carefully extracted himself from his hiding place, his old bones protesting but his mind sharp with purpose. He hurried back toward the slave quarters, knowing that Elias and Sophia needed more than just a plan for escape. They needed allies from both worlds if they were to survive what was coming. And time was running out faster than any of them realized. The wedding was only 3 days away, and death would be an uninvited but expected guest at the celebration. The wedding preparations transformed the Caldwell estate into a hive of frantic activity. Servants scurried between tasks, merchants delivered exotic goods, and slaves labored under the watchful eyes of increasingly agitated overseers. Beneath this chaos, 3 separate conspiracies unfolded like parallel threads in a complex tapestry. In the pre-dawn hours, Marcus gathered 5 trusted slaves in the stone quarry, far from prying ears. These weren't just any slaves. They were the survivors, those who had endured decades of Caldwell cruelty and lived to whisper about it. "Lord Caldwell plans to murder both Elias and Lady Sophia during the wedding feast," Marcus explained, his voice barely audible over the distant sound of hammering from the estate. "I heard him arrange it with an assassin. Poison, slow-acting, but certain." "Why risk ourselves for the master's daughter?" asked Darius, a scarred man who'd lost 3 fingers to Caldwell's punishment. "She's never suffered as we have." "She's risking everything to help Elias," Marcus countered. "And if what she claims is true, Elias isn't just our brother in chains. He's the governor's rightful heir. His freedom could mean something for all of us." Nia, the oldest woman among them, nodded slowly. "If the governor learns how his son has been treated all these years, Caldwell's cruelty might finally face justice." "What's the plan?" asked Tomas, the youngest but strongest of the group. Marcus outlined their roles, creating diversions, securing escape routes, and most critically switching the poisoned goblets that would be prepared for the bride and groom. Each task was dangerous. Discovery meant certain death. "We move tonight to prepare," Marcus concluded. "The wedding is tomorrow at midday." Meanwhile, in her chambers, Sophia was engaged in her own conspiracy. Her maid Lily had confessed to overhearing the well conversation, but instead of punishing the girl, Sophia had recruited her. "My father's study needs to be searched one final time," Sophia instructed, pinning up her hair for her final dress fitting. "There must be more evidence of his plot against the governor." "The master keeps the study locked now, my lady," Lily replied nervously, "since the documents went missing. Which is why I need you to create a distraction while I use this." Sophia revealed a slender key. "Copied from my father's ring while he slept. It won't be missed until tonight." As Sophia outlined her plan, a knock at the door silenced them both. The seamstress had arrived with the wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk and pearls that caught the light like morning dew. Sophia submitted to the fitting with practiced grace, her face a perfect mask of bridal anticipation while her mind calculated escape routes and contingencies. "You look beautiful, my lady," the seamstress gushed. "Lord Caldwell has spared no expense." "My father values appearances above all else," Sophia replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "One must maintain proper form, even when elevating a slave to family. After the seamstress departed, Sophia changed into a simple dress and waited for Lily's signal, a bell ringing to indicate Lord Caldwell had been successfully lured to the main hall by reports of problems with the wedding decorations. Slipping into her father's study, Sophia moved with practiced efficiency, searching the hidden compartments she'd discovered years ago while exploring the manor as a child. In the false bottom of her father's desk drawer, she found what she sought, a leather portfolio containing correspondence with mercenaries from 20 years ago, detailed maps of the Harrington estate, and, most damning of all, a letter to an apothecary requesting untraceable substances that might induce symptoms of natural illness. She was replacing the drawer when voices approached, her father returning much sooner than expected. With no time to reach the door, Sophia slipped behind the heavy velvet curtains, clutching the portfolio to her chest. Lord Caldwell entered with another man, the same assassin from the wall meeting, though Sophia couldn't know this. "The governor arrived early," Lord Caldwell said, pouring brandy for both of them. "He's staying at the Rose Inn in the village instead of his summer residence. Claims he wanted to be closer for the wedding preparations." "Problematic?" the assassin replied. "The plan was for them to die here, with you in control of the scene." "Adaptations must be made." Lord Caldwell sipped his brandy thoughtfully. "The poison must work faster. I need them dead before they leave the estate tomorrow night." "Faster acting means more detectable," the assassin warned, "and more suspicious." "I don't care. The governor is asking too many questions already, about the boy's background, his education. He's looking at Elias too closely." Lord Caldwell slammed down his glass. "I want them both dead before the wedding night. Adjust your methods accordingly. It will cost extra." "Everything costs extra," Lord Caldwell snapped. "Just get it done." After they left, Sophia remained frozen behind the curtain for several minutes, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might be heard throughout the manor. The timeline had accelerated dramatically. They couldn't wait for the wedding ceremony now. They needed to escape tonight. In the quarry, Elias worked with mechanical precision, his body performing the familiar labor while his mind processed everything he'd learned. The silver pendant hung against his chest, hidden beneath his rough shirt, a constant reminder of his true identity. "Slave," the overseer's voice cut through his thoughts. "Lord Caldwell demands your presence. Now." Escorted to the manor house, Elias was surprised to be led not to the work areas but to Lord Caldwell's private bath chamber, where servants had prepared a steaming tub. "Ah, my future son-in-law." Lord Caldwell's voice dripped with false warmth. "You can't be presented to the governor looking like a quarry rat. You'll be bathed, groomed, and dressed appropriately." Elias stood rigid as servants stripped and scrubbed him, aware of Lord Caldwell's calculating gaze. This wasn't preparation for a wedding. It was inspection of merchandise before sale. "Remarkable," Lord Caldwell mused, circling Elias. 20 years of labor, and yet you've maintained such quality. The governor will certainly recognize your resemblance to his family immediately." "Is that your hope?" Elias asked quietly, meeting Lord Caldwell's eyes directly, a slave's ultimate defiance. Instead of anger, Lord Caldwell smiled. "My hope is that tomorrow's celebration brings everyone exactly what they deserve." He gestured to a servant. "Show him the birthmark." Rough hands spun Elias around, exposing the crescent-shaped mark on his shoulder blade. "Perfect," Lord Caldwell murmured. "Absolutely perfect. The last piece of proof, should any be required." After being dressed in clothes finer than any he'd ever worn, still simple compared to nobility, but clean and well-made, Elias was escorted to a small chamber near the servants' quarters. "You'll remain here until the ceremony," the overseer informed him. "Consider it your last night as a slave." The door locked behind him with ominous finality. The room contained a proper bed, a luxury Elias had never experienced, but it might as well have been a coffin. The walls were thick stone, the single window too small for even a child to squeeze through, and the door solid oak with iron reinforcements. This wasn't preparation, it was imprisonment. As darkness fell, Elias paced the small room, wondering if Sophia had discovered his absence yet, if their plans were already unraveling. He examined every inch of his cell, searching for weaknesses, finding none. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a soft scratching came from the door, then the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened just enough for a small figure to slip through, Lily, Sophia's maid. "My lady sent me," she whispered, pressing a folded note into his hand. "Everything has changed. The governor is here early, and your deaths are planned for tomorrow during the feast." Elias quickly read Sophia's elegant script, his blood turning cold at the accelerated timeline and the evidence she'd discovered. "Can you get a message to Marcus?" he asked urgently. Lily nodded. "He's waiting in the kitchen gardens. Lady Sophia is creating a distraction at dinner to cover your escape. You must go now. The night patrol changes guards in 10 minutes, leaving the east gate unattended briefly." Elias hesitated. "What about Sophia?" "She'll meet you at the governor's inn as planned. She can't disappear before dinner without raising immediate alarm." Lily pressed a small bundle into his hands. "Clothes, food, and the documents you'll need. Lady Sophia says to bring the pendant. It's your strongest proof." With no time to waste, Elias followed Lily through the servant passages, moving silently despite his size. In the kitchen gardens, Marcus waited with grim determination. "The others are in position," the old slave reported, "creating confusion around the estate to mask your departure. But there's a complication. Lord Caldwell has hired additional guards for tonight. They're patrolling the grounds in pairs." "He suspects something," Elias realized. "Or he's simply taking no chances with his valuable property," Marcus replied bitterly. "Either way, the east gate won't be clear as planned." "Then we adapt," Elias decided, thinking quickly. "The drainage tunnel by the north wall, the one that floods during heavy rains. Is it still unguarded?" "It's half collapsed and filled with filth," Marcus warned, "which is why no one would expect it to be an escape route," Elias countered. "I can squeeze through." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "I'll create a distraction near the stables. Draw the patrols away from the north section." "No." Elias gripped the older man's shoulder. "You've risked enough. Guide me to the tunnel, then return to safety." "There is no safety here," Marcus replied quietly. "Not for any of us. Lord Caldwell will purge the entire slave quarter once he realizes you've escaped. We've all chosen our paths tonight." Before Elias could protest further, shouts erupted from the main house. Through the windows they could see servants running, guards converging. "What's happening?" Elias asked, tensing for discovery. Lily's eyes widened with fear. "The dinner. Something's gone wrong." Marcus grabbed Elias's arm. "We go now, while they're distracted. Whatever's happening in there works in our favor." As they slipped into the darkness, none of them could know that the third thread of conspiracy had just unraveled in spectacular fashion. In the dining hall, Lord Caldwell was clutching his throat, his face purpling as he collapsed across the table, sending crystal and silver crashing to the floor. And Sophia, rising from her seat with cold composure, was already walking toward the door, pausing only to address the stunned dinner guests. "It appears my father has been poisoned. How tragically ironic, considering his own plans for tomorrow's feast." By the time the house erupted into chaos, she was already changing into riding clothes, prepared to execute the final phase of a plan that had evolved far beyond simple escape. What had begun as survival had transformed into justice. Swift, merciless, and long overdue. The Rose Inn glowed like a beacon in the midnight darkness, its windows spilling warm light onto the cobblestone street of the village. Inside the private dining room, Governor Harrington sat alone with a glass of brandy, reviewing documents spread across the polished table. At 63, his once black hair had turned silver, but his posture remained military straight, his amber eyes still sharp beneath heavy brows. The flickering candlelight cast deep shadows across the weathered planes of his face, a face that had witnessed both the glory and horror of the border wars, the rise and fall of political rivals, and the endless grief of a father who had lost his only son. His fingers traced the boundary lines on a provincial map, territory disputed for generations, now finally secured through treaties rather than bloodshed. 20 years of diplomatic work had transformed him from a military captain to the most powerful governor in the realm. Yet for all his accomplishments, the hollow ache of personal loss had never diminished. The portrait miniature of his wife and child remained in his breast pocket always, a weight against his heart that balanced the weight of his official seal. A discreet knock interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he called, not looking up from his papers, expecting his aide with the night's security report. The innkeeper appeared instead, wringing his hands nervously, his balding head shining with perspiration despite the cool night air. "Begging your pardon, Governor, but there's a situation. A young woman insists on seeing you, says it's a matter of life and death." "At this hour?" The governor frowned, setting down his quill. "Who is she?" "Lady Sophia Caldwell, sir, Lord Caldwell's daughter." The governor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The bride from tomorrow's ceremony? Show her in immediately." As the innkeeper hurried away, the governor quickly gathered the sensitive documents into a portfolio. Lord Caldwell's daughter appearing unannounced and unescorted at midnight could only mean trouble, perhaps related to the very ceremony he'd been reluctant to attend. The marriage of nobility to a former slave, while not unprecedented, carried political implications he'd been carefully weighing. Lord Caldwell's sudden generosity toward a slave had struck him as uncharacteristic, based on what he knew of the man's reputation. Moments later, Sophia entered, still wearing riding clothes splattered with mud, her cloak torn at the hem, her hair wind-blown and her face flushed from exertion. Despite her disheveled appearance, she carried herself with unmistakable nobility, chin high, shoulders back, her gray eyes clear and direct. The governor noted the intelligence in those eyes, and something else, a hardness unusual in one so young, especially a woman of privileged birth. "Lady Sophia," the governor rose, concern evident on his face. "What brings you here in such a state? Has something happened at the estate?" "My father is dead," she stated without preamble, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Poisoned at dinner by his own assassin, the very man he hired to murder me and your son tomorrow." The governor stared at her, momentarily speechless. His mind registered the words individually: father, dead, poison, assassin, murder, but struggled to assemble them into coherent meaning. One phrase, however, sliced through his confusion like a blade. "My son?" he finally managed, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Young lady, my son died 20 years ago in a border raid. His remains were never found, but the evidence of his death was conclusive." "No, Governor." Sophia placed a leather portfolio on the table between them, her movements deliberate and precise. "Your son was kidnapped by my father during that raid. He's been raised as a slave on our estate, his identity concealed until my father could extract maximum profit from revealing him to you." The governor's face hardened, years of political negotiation allowing him to mask the sudden storm of emotion her words provoked. "These are extraordinary accusations against a man who can no longer defend himself. Lord Caldwell and I had our differences, but he was a nobleman with a respected lineage." "Respected lineage doesn't preclude monstrous actions," Sophia replied evenly, "which is why I brought proof." She opened the portfolio, revealing the documents she'd taken from her father's study. "My father's correspondence with the mercenaries he hired to attack your summer residence, maps of your estate with guard positions marked, records of payments to informants who tracked your family's movements. And this," She produced the original birth certificate with the infant footprint, carefully preserved despite its age, stolen from your home during the raid. The governor's hands trembled slightly as he examined the documents, recognition dawning in his eyes. The birth certificate especially. He'd filled it out himself, recording his son's measurements, pressing the tiny foot into the ink himself while his wife looked on with exhausted joy. The memory, so long buried beneath grief, surfaced with painful clarity. "Where is he?" he asked hoarsely, a father's question breaking through the governor's composure. "Where is my son?" "He should be arriving shortly. We plan to escape separately to avoid detection." Sophia moved to the window, scanning the dark street, anxiously. "He was to come through the north drainage tunnel while I created a distraction." "And you certainly succeeded at that," the governor remarked dryly, regaining some of his equilibrium. "The news of Lord Caldwell's death will reach me officially by morning. The provincial magistrate will expect a full accounting." "It wasn't my intention," Sophia admitted, turning back to face him. "The assassin's poison was meant for me and Elias tomorrow. Somehow, my father received his own medicine tonight instead." A shadow crossed her face. "I suspect the assassin betrayed him. Such men are loyal only to the highest bidder, after all." The governor studied her face carefully, years of political intrigue having honed his ability to detect deception. "You don't seem particularly grieved by your father's death." "My grief was spent years ago, watching him destroy lives for profit," she replied evenly. "What remains is relief, for myself, for Elias, and for every slave on the estate who lived under his cruelty." "You speak of slavery with unusual disapproval for someone raised in a household that practices it," the governor observed. "My mother's influence," Sophia explained, a momentary softness crossing her features. "She came from the western provinces, where the practice is less common. Before her death, she taught me to see people as people, regardless of their station. My father considered it her greatest failure as a parent." The governor nodded thoughtfully. The western provinces had indeed been moving toward abolition for years, a political current he himself had been quietly supporting despite resistance from landowners in his own territory. Before he could inquire further, another knock came at the door, more hesitant than the first. The innkeeper's voice called through the wood. "Governor, forgive the interruption, but there's another visitor." "Show them in," the governor replied, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. This time, when the door opened, Elias stood in the threshold, his fine clothes now filthy and torn from his escape through the drainage tunnel. A cut above his eyebrow leaked blood down the side of his face, and his hands bore fresh scrapes, but he stood tall, unbroken by whatever hardships the escape had entailed. Despite his disheveled state, the resemblance between him and the governor was unmistakable. The same strong jawline, the same amber eyes, even the same way of holding himself, weight slightly forward on the balls of the feet, ready for action. The governor rose slowly, his face draining of color as he stared at the young man before him. "It's not possible," he whispered, though his eyes told a different story. Recognition, wonder, and a desperate hope he'd suppressed for 2 decades. Elias stepped forward, removing the silver pendant from around his neck and placing it on the table. The metal gleamed in the candlelight, tarnished but unmistakable in its design. "This was around my neck when Lord Caldwell took me. Helena, the kitchen servant, saved it when I was first brought to the estate." With shaking hands, the governor picked up the pendant, running his thumb over the crescent moon and star emblem of his family. "I gave this to you on your 5th birthday," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother had one just like it. A matching set, commissioned from the royal silversmith when you were born." "I have the birthmark as well," Elias said quietly. "The crescent on my right shoulder. Helena told me it marks the Harrington line." "May I see it?" the governor asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Elias nodded, turning and pulling aside his torn shirt to reveal the pale, crescent-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder blade, identical to the one the governor himself bore, and his father before him, a genetic trait passed down through generations of Harrington men. James. The governor breathed his son's true name, the name that had gone unspoken in his household for years because the pain of utterance was too great. You were named James after my father. For a moment, the room was silent save for the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the inn below, murmured conversations, the clink of glasses, ordinary life continuing while 3 lives hung suspended in an extraordinary moment of recognition. Then, with a suddenness that startled Sophia, the governor closed the distance between them and embraced his son fiercely. Elias stood rigid at first, unused to such contact after years where touch meant only pain or labor, before slowly raising his arms to return the embrace. 20 years, the governor murmured, his voice muffled against his son's shoulder. 20 years I searched for you. I never believed you were dead, never accepted it, though everyone insisted I was chasing ghosts. Your mother died, still believing you might return someday. At the mention of his mother, Elias drew back slightly. My mother? What happened to her? The governor's face reflected old grief. She never recovered from your loss. The grief, it consumed her health gradually. She died 12 years ago, still keeping your room exactly as you left it, still insisting you would come home. He swallowed hard. She would have recognized you instantly. She always said you had my features, but her spirit. When they finally separated fully, both men's eyes were damp, though neither acknowledged it. The governor turned to include Sophia in their circle, his political mind reasserting itself as he considered the broader implications of the night's revelations. You risked everything to bring my son to me, he said gravely. Why? Your father's plan would have made you wealthy through marriage. Even if you discovered his plot, you could have simply fled alone. And widowed by dinner's end, Sophia replied with a bitter smile. Besides, some prices are too high, even for survival. I couldn't be complicit in such cruelty, not once I knew the truth. She hesitated, then added more softly, and Elias deserved to know his true identity. Everyone deserves to know who they really are. The governor nodded, recognizing the principle behind her words, a moral compass surprisingly intact despite her upbringing. You'll have my protection, regardless of what investigations into your father's death may reveal. I had no hand in his murder, Sophia stated firmly, though I cannot pretend to mourn him. A commotion outside drew their attention to the window. Torches approached the inn, accompanied by the sound of horses and men shouting orders. The night had grown darker, the village street now illuminated only by these approaching flames and the thin sliver of moon overhead. The estate guards, Sophia recognized with alarm, her hand instinctively reaching for Elias's arm. They must have followed one of us. Or both, Elias added grimly. Lord Caldwell's death would have thrown the household into chaos, but someone clearly maintained enough control to organize a pursuit. The governor moved to the window, assessing the approaching force with a military eye. At least 20 men, well armed. They're surrounding the inn in standard formation. Whoever leads them has military training. The captain of that group is Lord Preston, your father's cousin, if I'm not mistaken. My father's most loyal supporter and the executor of his will, Sophia confirmed, her expression darkening. He served in the southern campaigns before retiring to manage his own estates. He stands to inherit everything if I'm declared complicit in my father's death. Which is precisely what he intends to do, the governor concluded. Capture you both, declare you murderers, and claim the estate through the inheritance provisions. Preston has always coveted our lands, Sophia added. His own estates are heavily mortgaged, his mines depleted. My father kept him close because family loyalty was the one principle he respected, but Preston has always wanted more. The innkeeper burst in without knocking, his face pale with fear. "Governor, armed men are surrounding the inn. They're demanding Lady Caldwell and a fugitive slave be turned over to them immediately. They're threatening to burn the building if we refuse." The governor straightened, his expression transforming from father to statesman in an instant. The vulnerability of the reunion vanished behind the mask of authority he'd worn for decades. "Tell them the governor of the Eastern Province does not respond to demands or threats against civilians. They may send one representative, unarmed, to discuss the matter civilly. Make it clear that any violence against this establishment will be considered an attack on provincial authority itself." As the innkeeper hurried to deliver the message, the governor turned to a large trunk in the corner, unlocking it with a key from his pocket to reveal weapons and armor, the practical necessities of a man who had risen to power during unstable times. "Fortunately," he said, removing 2 swords and testing their balance with practiced hands, "I never travel without protection. My personal guard is quartered in the stables, only 6 men, but well-trained and loyal to death." He handed a sword to Elias. "Do you know how to use this?" Elias weighed the unfamiliar weapon, testing its balance as he'd seen the governor do. "No formal training, but I'm strong and quick. I've watched the estate guards practice enough to understand the basics." "It may not come to fighting," the governor said, though his preparation suggested otherwise. "My authority supersedes any local power, even Lord Preston's. The provincial charter is clear on matters of jurisdiction." "Authority recognized by law," Sophia pointed out pragmatically. "But Preston has 20 armed men who may choose to recognize only the authority of steel tonight. Laws are only as powerful as the forces willing to enforce them." The governor smiled grimly at her assessment. "A political insight worthy of the royal court, my lady. But rest assured, I've spent my career ensuring the province's laws have teeth." He moved to the window again, signaling briefly to someone in the shadows below. "My captain is already mobilizing our guards. Preston will find us less defenseless than he imagines." A tense silence fell as they waited for the response to the governor's message. The minutes stretched, marked only by the steady tick of the mantel clock and the occasional clink of armor as the governor's men took positions throughout the inn. Finally, heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the distinctive sound of spurs on wooden stairs. Without waiting for an invitation, Lord Preston himself entered the room, flanked by 2 guards who remained just outside the doorway despite the terms of parley. Preston cut an impressive figure, tall and lean, with features sharpened by ambition and hardship. Unlike Lord Caldwell's florid countenance, Preston's face was all angles and planes, his gray hair cropped close in military fashion, his eyes the cold blue of winter ice. He wore riding clothes with a sword at his hip, technically armed, another violation of the parley terms. He surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure, taking in the governor's defensive posture, Sophia's defiant stance, and Elias's sword with a single, sweeping glance. "Governor," he acknowledged with minimal courtesy before fixing his gaze on Sophia. "Lady Caldwell, you are wanted for questioning regarding your father's sudden death. The household physician has already noted signs of poisoning. And this," his eyes flicked dismissively to Elias, "slave is property of the Caldwell estate, now absconded with valuable items including your father's signet ring, which disappeared tonight. This slave is my son, James Harrington, heir to the Eastern Province," the governor declared firmly. "Kidnapped as a child and illegally enslaved by Lord Caldwell, as these documents prove." He gestured to the portfolio on the table. "His identity has been confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt." Lord Preston's expression didn't change, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Convenient claims, conveniently timed after Lord Caldwell can no longer dispute them. A touching reunion narrative to distract from the obvious. The girl poisoned her father and fled with her slave lover, both now seeking protection by fabricating an elaborate tale." "My father's own records dispute any denial," Sophia countered, stepping forward, "as does the physical evidence. The birthmark, the pendant, the striking resemblance." trinkets, and forgeries. Preston dismissed with a wave of his gloved hand. A crescent birthmark is hardly unique. The pendant could be a recent acquisition from any silversmith. And resemblance. Half the noble houses share bloodlines if one looks back far enough. His cold gaze shifted to the governor. Your grief for your lost son is well known and easily exploited by clever opportunists. You overstep, Preston, the governor warned, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. Your insinuations border on insult to both my intelligence and my office. No insult intended, Governor, merely concern for justice. Preston's tone remained formal but unyielding. With all respect to your position, this is a family matter concerning the Caldwell estate. The girl has murdered her father to elope with a slave. Justice demands they return to face proper investigation by those who knew Lord Caldwell best. By those who knew him best, you mean yourself, Sophia interjected. The man who stands to inherit everything if I'm convicted of patricide. Preston's eyes narrowed at her. Your father's death grieves me deeply, child. That you would compound that tragedy with false accusations against his memory only confirms your moral corruption. Justice, the governor interrupted, his voice like steel striking stone, is precisely what will be served here. But not by a mob at midnight, led by a man with obvious conflicts of interest. He stepped forward, using his height to advantage. Here is what will happen, Lord Preston. You will withdraw your men immediately. Lady Caldwell and my son will remain under my protection. Tomorrow, we will all return to the Caldwell estate where a full investigation will be conducted by provincial authorities, not family members with vested interests in the outcome. You exceed your jurisdiction, Preston countered. The Caldwell estate falls within the autonomous district granted to our family by royal charter 3 generations ago. Local justice is administered by the family patriarch, which, with Caldwell's death, is now me. Royal charters exist at the pleasure of the Crown and its representatives, the governor replied smoothly, and autonomous districts remain subject to provincial authority in cases involving murder, treason, and— His eyes locked with Preston's. The kidnapping of provincial officials or their families. The law is quite clear on this point. Preston's jaw tightened as he recognized the legal trap. The governor had him cornered. Invoking the kidnapping clause gave provincial authorities immediate jurisdiction over the entire matter. And if I refuse these terms, he asked, his hand drifting toward his sword hilt, then you will find yourself explaining to the king why you attacked the governor of the eastern province, the governor replied evenly. A conversation I doubt would end in your favor, given His Majesty's recent displeasure with autonomous districts that overreach their privileges. The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats. Through the window, Sophia could see Preston's men surrounding the inn, torches illuminating their weapons. A clear threat despite the diplomatic conversation occurring inside. Equally visible were the governor's guards, fewer in number but positioned strategically at key points, their crossbows trained on Preston's officers. Finally, Preston's practical nature asserted itself. Outnumbered in authority if not in men, he gave a curt nod. Until tomorrow, then, he conceded coldly. But the slave remains a state property until proven otherwise in a proper court. I expect him returned with you. My son, the governor corrected with dangerous quietness, remains with me. Any attempt to claim him will be considered an act of aggression against the province itself. Choose your next actions carefully, Preston. Your cousin's crimes have already placed your family in a precarious position. Preston's face flushed with anger, but he mastered it quickly. We shall see what evidence survives scrutiny, Governor. Good night. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Lady Sophia, consider carefully where your true loyalties should lie. Family blood is not so easily washed away, even by patricide. After Preston departed, the three of them remained silent, listening to the sounds of men and horses withdrawing from the inn yard. Only when the governor's captain reported that Preston's forces had truly left the village did any of them relax slightly. "He's retreating for now, but this isn't over," Sophia said, sinking into a chair as reaction to the night's events finally caught up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through escape, confrontation, and standoff began to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Preston won't surrender the estate or its assets without a fight, legal or otherwise. Nor will he accept Elias's true identity without exhausting every possible challenge, the governor agreed, pouring brandy for all of them from a crystal decanter on the sideboard. "The burden of proof lies with us, despite the evidence we already possess." "What evidence would be considered definitive?" Elias asked, accepting the unfamiliar drink cautiously. He sniffed it before taking a small sip, the strong spirit causing him to cough slightly. "Witness testimony," the governor replied, swirling his own brandy thoughtfully. "Particularly from those present when you were first brought to the estate, documents with official seals, and, most importantly, a formal identification by someone beyond our immediate circle, someone whose word carries weight and who knew you before the kidnapping." "My old nurse," Elias suggested suddenly, a memory surfacing. "I've had dreams, fragments of memories, of a woman singing to me. She had a distinctive birthmark on her face, like a leaf." The governor's eyes widened. "Mary Ann. Yes, she had a port wine stain on her right cheek. She was devoted to you. After your disappearance, she never stopped searching, traveling from village to village following rumors and supposed sightings." His expression softened with sadness. "She died 10 years ago, still searching." "What about the royal physician?" Sophia suggested. "Surely he attended the birth of the governor's son. Medical records might still exist." "Dr. Thornfield," the governor nodded. "He's retired now, but still lives in the capital. His records were meticulous. He would have documented any distinctive features, including the birthmark." He set down his glass decisively. "I'll dispatch a messenger tonight to request his presence." "Dawn brings advantages Preston doesn't anticipate," the governor continued, moving to a writing desk in the corner and quickly penning several messages. "My personal guard is merely the advance party. The main provincial force, 50 soldiers, camps just beyond the village awaiting my orders. I came prepared for difficulties, though I expected them from Lord Caldwell, not his cousin." "You suspected something about the wedding invitation," Sophia observed shrewdly. "Let's say I found it curious that Lord Caldwell would suddenly elevate a slave to family status, especially given his well-known views on maintaining social hierarchy," the governor replied diplomatically. "When the invitation mentioned the slave's remarkable qualities and distinguished bearing, I wondered what game was being played." 50 soldiers won't change the fact that we fled the scene of my father's death," Sophia pointed out pragmatically. "In the eyes of many, that alone suggests guilt. Which is why we need witnesses who can testify to Lord Caldwell's plot," the governor said, sealing his messages with wax and his signet ring. "The assassin, if he can be found. Servants who overheard plans. Anyone who can corroborate your story and establish a pattern of Lord Caldwell's criminal behavior." "Marcus," Elias said immediately. "He helped orchestrate our escape and overheard Lord Caldwell discussing the assassination with the hired killer. And Helena from the kitchen, who saved my pendant and knows how I was brought to the estate. And Lily, Sophia's maid, who helped us escape. If they still live," Sophia added softly, voicing the fear that had been growing since their flight. "My father's death will have unleashed chaos at the estate. Preston may already be eliminating potential witnesses, anyone who could support our claims." The governor's expression hardened at this suggestion, the political calculation in his eyes shifting to something colder and more determined. "Then we move now, not at dawn. I'll wake my captain and issue orders for the main force to surround the estate. No one enters or leaves until we arrive and take control." As the governor strode from the room to implement his plan, Sophia and Elias found themselves alone for the first time since their separate escapes. The fire had burned low in the grate, casting the room in a warm amber glow that softened the tension of the preceding hours. Outside, the village had fallen silent, most of its inhabitants unaware of the power struggle unfolding in their midst. "You're injured," Sophia noted, gesturing to the cut above Elias's eye that had left a trail of dried blood down his face. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "The drainage tunnel was narrower than I remembered, with broken stones in places." "Let me," she insisted, dipping a handkerchief in the water pitcher and approaching him. With gentle movements at odds with her earlier fierceness, she cleaned the wound, her face concentrated on the task. "You could have fled anywhere," Elias said quietly, watching her work. "Why risk returning to the estate tomorrow? Preston will do everything possible to implicate you in your father's death." "Because running would only confirm guilt in everyone's eyes," Sophia replied, her focus still on the wound. "Besides, the estate isn't just land and a house, it's people. Servants, workers, slaves who have nowhere else to go. I can't abandon them to Preston's mercy, which is no mercy at all." She stepped back, examining her handiwork. "There. It's not deep, but it will leave a scar." "One more won't matter," Elias said with a hint of wry humor, touching the old scars on his hands and arms, marks of 20 years of labor and punishment. Sophia's expression softened. "They're marks of survival, not shame." She moved to the fire, adding another log from the basket beside the hearth. "What will you do now? You found your father, your true identity. You're heir to the Eastern Province. No longer a slave, but one of the most powerful young men in the kingdom." Elias studied his hands, calloused, scarred, strong from years of labor. Hands that had never held a pen, never turned the pages of a book, never done any of the things expected of nobility. "I don't know how to be James Harrington," he admitted. "I know stone and soil, not politics and power." "You'll learn," Sophia said with quiet confidence. "You survived 20 years of slavery without losing your humanity or your intelligence. Court politics will be simple by comparison." Elias studied her face in the firelight, seeing beyond her exhaustion to the steel beneath. "You never intended just to escape, did you? Even from the beginning. There was always a larger plan." "I intended to survive," Sophia corrected. "But survival without justice is merely postponing an inevitable reckoning." She met his gaze directly. "And some reckonings cannot, should not, be avoided. Justice for your father's crimes?" "Justice for everyone he harmed," Sophia clarified, "including you, including the dozens of slaves who died in his quarries and fields, including my mother, whose spirit he broke long before her body failed." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old pain. "My father taught me one valuable lesson. Power must be wielded decisively. I intend to use that lesson against his memory." The governor returned before Elias could respond, now wearing a sword at his hip and accompanied by a uniformed captain who bowed respectfully to the room. Captain Merrick was a weathered man of middle years, with the watchful eyes of a career soldier and a neatly trimmed beard streaked with gray. "Orders have been dispatched," the governor announced. "We ride for the Caldwell estate within the hour. Captain Merrick has sent scouts ahead to establish a perimeter and ensure Preston doesn't attempt any preemptive actions." "What of the estate slaves?" Elias asked immediately. "They'll be the most vulnerable to Preston's retaliation." "My orders were specific," Captain Merrick assured him. "The slave quarters are to be secured first, with guards posted to prevent any disciplinary actions by the estate overseers." "I suggest you both rest while preparations are made," the governor continued. "The night has already been long, and tomorrow will demand all our strength and clarity." But rest would prove elusive for all of them that night. While the governor conferred with his captain over maps and deployment strategies, Elias paced the room, his mind racing with newfound memories triggered by the night's revelations. fragments of his early childhood surfacing like debris after a storm. A garden with white roses, a pond with golden fish, his mother's perfume, lavender and vanilla, his father's study with maps similar to those now spread across the table. Sophia sat by the window, watching the village slowly come to life as dawn approached. Bakers were the first to rise, and the smell of fresh bread began to waft through the streets. Soon, merchants would open their shops, farmers would bring produce to market, and ordinary life would continue, all unaware that the province's power balance was shifting dramatically in their midst. As she stared into the dying embers of the fire, she couldn't help wondering which was more dangerous, the enemy they'd just confronted in Lord Preston, or the truths still waiting to be uncovered at the estate. For every conspiracy exposed seemed to reveal another, deeper layer of deception beneath, and somewhere in that web of lies and half-truths lay the final answer to a question none of them had yet asked aloud. Who had really poisoned Lord Caldwell? The assassin he'd hired, or someone else with motives yet unknown? The reckoning, it seemed, had only just begun. As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern hills, illuminating the village with pale golden light, the governor's forces assembled in the inn yard. 6 elite guards and the governor himself, all mounted on fine horses. For Elias and Sophia, 2 additional mounts had been procured from the village stables, not the quality of the governor's thoroughbreds, but strong and sure-footed. Elias approached his horse with caution, having ridden only draft animals in the fields and never with a proper saddle. The chestnut gelding regarded him with liquid brown eyes, neither fearful nor particularly impressed by his new rider. "He senses your uncertainty," the governor observed, guiding his own mount alongside. "Horses respond to confidence. Sit tall, hold the reins firmly but not tightly, and remember, you're not asking permission to lead, you're simply expecting to be followed." "A lesson for more than horsemanship, I think," Elias replied with a hint of a smile. "Indeed," the governor nodded approvingly. "The first of many such lessons in your new life. The transition won't be easy. Nobility brings burdens as well as privileges." "I've carried burdens before," Elias said, straightening in the saddle and gathering the reins as he'd been shown. "Different weight, same shoulders." As they rode out of the village, the main provincial force joined them. 50 disciplined soldiers in the governor's colors of blue and silver, their armor gleaming in the morning light. The column moved swiftly but without urgency, maintaining the appearance of an official visit rather than a military intervention. Sophia rode beside Elias, her face composed despite the emotional turmoil of returning to the scene of her father's death and her own near imprisonment. She had changed from her mud-splattered riding clothes into a simple blue dress provided by the innkeeper's wife, not the finery of her station, but clean and practical for the journey. "The estate will be watching for our approach," she observed as they crested a hill that offered the first distant view of Caldwell lands. "Preston will have scouts posted." "Let them watch," the governor replied. "We have nothing to hide and everything to enforce. The law rides with us today." The law, Sophia thought but did not say, had failed to protect Elias for 20 years, had failed to uncover her father's crimes, had failed the countless slaves who had died under Caldwell ownership. But she kept these thoughts private, understanding that the governor, for all his personal stake in this matter, was still a man who believed in systems and institutions. As the estate buildings came into view in the distance, Elias felt a strange doubling of perspective, seeing simultaneously the prison it had been and the grand property it objectively was. Extensive fields surrounded the central manor house, a 3-story stone structure with 2 extending wings. Beyond lay the quarries where he had labored for most of his life, their gray scars visible even from this distance. To the east stood the slave quarters, simple wooden structures maintained just well enough to keep the human property functioning. "It's larger than I remembered," he murmured, realizing he had never before seen the estate in its entirety, his perspective always limited to whichever section he was assigned to work. The Caldwell holdings are among the largest in the province, the governor confirmed. Nearly 5,000 acres, including the forest to the north and the river access to the south. Valuable land, especially with the quarry rights. Land paid for with blood, Elias said quietly. As they approached the main gates, a contingent,